All right. Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. We have a little bit different, something different here at Code Platoon that we're going to do. And tonight's topic of conversation is music and coding. It became apparent to me in the last year that we at Code Platoon have had a disproportionate number of people come through our program who were in military bands. And they were actually musicians in military bands before they came through Code Platoon. So it kind of piqued my interest as a hobbyist musician, and I am a very informal musician. It piqued my interest because I wanted to know more about this crossover. What is the relationship? So we have two Code Platoon alumni here with us tonight, and I'm going to start off just by asking kind of a prompt, and then when I give you this prompt, I want you guys just to give like a very brief background of what you did to bring you here, and then maybe give your thoughts on my prompt. So here's my idea. My idea is that coding and professional musicianship involve a lot of the same aspects of our mental capacity. So when you are a professional level musician, you obviously have to know how to sight read music, how to learn how to read music. And that is in a form of code, right? We may not think of it as code. Maybe musicians don't think of it as code, but it's a language. It's a way of communicating ideas on two-dimensional format, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think that enables people to maybe better grasp things like coding language. And I think there's also a creative element to it too, the creative aspect of musicianship translating into wanting to create things in the world of software. So Susan, how about we go to you first? And what are your thoughts on my prompt first? And also, like, how did you get here?
Well, Greg, I think you summed it up really well. Yeah, because music is a language and you're interpreting the symbols you see on the page into sound. And I guess I would say code is similar in that way because you're typing commands into the computer that the computer understands, and that translates into whatever action it is in the app or website that you're building that's in a way that's presentable to the user. So it takes something that on the surface doesn't make sense and turns it into something that does make sense to the average person. So yeah, I do see the connection there.
Sure. Chad, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I know kind of I didn't really think about it before I joined Code Platoon. I think it kind of started becoming more and more apparent that this is a lot like there's a lot of parallels here between music and coding. And so like, especially during the cohort, I was really kind of discovering more and more. It's like, it's very creative, like you said. It's not just, what you're creating, but how you're creating it. There's a thousand ways to code something and kind of how you go about it, you make it your own. And then I also really loved kind of the a lot like music, the collaborative aspect to it is that you're definitely working with the team within a team, and that if sometimes we all have bad days, sometimes we have great days, and it kind of it's yeah. So I mean, we bring whatever you can to the team, and so it is pretty amazing actually. So yeah.
Sure. And now what did you do in the military specifically? Like what you were part of a band, right? You were part of a military band.
Yep. Yeah, so I was in I just retired in August after about a little over 20 years, and so I was in the Army Field Band as a bass clarinetist. I
Okay.
kind of played all the big clarinets. That was my gig. So it's pretty awesome. And
Fantastic.
and kind of like what you said, like you always had to. I was always on a different clarinet. Yeah, every song, almost every concert, and so picking up a different horn and kind of figuring it out and making it work, and just being part of that collaborative team again. Just what my little part does compared to everybody else, and just making it fit. And I find that a lot of coding is kind of like that. You all kind of get your own small bit, and you make it a part of the whole. And so it was yeah, you just have to just make sure you're prepared and kind of bring your A game every time because everybody's depending on you. So.
Sure. Now, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you come from a perspective of having a bit more background in music education. Is that right?
Somewhat. I studied music in college. I was never active duty military band, but my husband is, and he's coming up on 20 years in the Navy right now, about to retire. And I know that a few of his colleagues are also Code Platoon grads. And I worked in arts administration for several years after I left school, and I was an orchestra librarian for a little while. And so I come here from that world.
Right. Right. Now, do you see kind of, I see that a lot in a lot of different areas, but I think music, especially what Chad's saying is you're understanding how your piece fits into a much larger composition, if you will. Do you see that as being a beneficial way to learning about software development?
Yes, in the sense that, so a lot of times what I end up doing at my job is just small adjustments. You try something and it doesn't work. You make a small adjustment, and that's a lot like what you do in a practice room. So that's, yeah, that's the thing I could think of that most relates to what I do on a daily basis.
Sure, sure. And I'm glad to see that Jake made it. And so we'll let him jump in. I'll just throw him right into the fire. Jake, the kind of the question at hand is, as I proposed the idea, was that there's number one, there's a fair amount of musicians who came through Code Platoon, an odd amount of musicians, considering that like that's not a huge component in the military, right? There's proportional to the US military and then proportional to Code Platoon. I think that there is a substantial number of musicians who's come through. I think I see it as kind of musicians have a natural knack for learning language. It just happens that their language was notation on the page, but I think that translates well into the software development field. So just a quick summary of like how you got here and what do you think about that? Like, do you agree that gives you kind of an advantage of understanding how to read and apply code?
Sure. Well, first off, sorry I'm late. I got caught in a debug session with one of my senior engineers who's helping me out, and I lost track of time. So nice to see you guys.
Hey, it applies. It applies.
Yes, sure. Well, I think, I guess for me, I finished, when I finished grad school, I was looking for kind of I wanted to stay in music, but I wanted something a little different. So I joined the Army bands, and it was also during COVID. So I was looking for a steady paycheck, which were few and far between for freelance musicians at that point. And then towards the end of my time in the Army, I had decided I wanted to keep music in my life, but I wanted to pursue a new job full time. And that's what led me to Code Platoon. I think that I definitely agree that the ability to kind of learn and understand new languages is something that musicians definitely have. But I think more than that, as every musician will tell you, they're very good at delayed gratification. When you're learning an instrument, there is, rarely are you ever just going to try something and it's going to click the first time. It's going to be hours of repetition every day for a long period of time before you get any kind of payoff on that. And that was the exact same thing I found with coding. After kind of past the hello world phase, it's going to be kind of a grind for a while until you can kind of make anything worthwhile. So to me, that was the biggest parallel that I found, was being okay with putting work in with the understanding that the reward would come further down the road.
That's a fascinating way of thinking about it. And I hadn't even considered that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember first learning to play guitar, and it was, just playing that one F chord is like, it's good. I can never do it. It's not possible.
Okay.
And then, years later, you're like, it's second nature, no big deal. I see Chad nodding vigorously. I think he agrees. Now, do you think, and my understanding is, and I could be wrong because I've not been in a military band, do you think that the process of getting into the band itself actually helped set you up for success as well? Because my understanding is that it's not super easy. Like, you don't just, I can play a few notes on a horn and therefore I can get into a military band, right? I mean, it does take some amount of skill before you even get there. Unlike I joined the airborne infantry, and that, like, if you're walking and breathing and you can run a mile, like, you're in. Cool. Whereas I think the band requires a little bit more. Is that more or less accurate?
Yes,
Yeah.
can me open the floor. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, and no, it totally is. I had a bit unique situation in that I was there I guess I don't want to say levels, like one is better than the other, but there are different I guess bands, I know in the army. So there's what we call premier bands, and we have what are called regular bands. And so I was actually in a regular band before, and I'd actually auditioned for a premier band. The premier bands are actually pretty competitive. Like, it's like an orchestral job audition. And so I didn't get it the first time, and so I definitely wanted to join the army and be a musician, and so I was able to join the regular band. A few years later, position opened up again. I auditioned again, and I got it. But yeah, it's pretty competitive. Even for the regular bands, they don't take just any person off the street. Oftentimes they're college graduates, or master's degrees,
Mhm.
And they bring a lot of already learned skill to the profession. So it was it's kind of nice. You join a group of people that are actually very well trained already. So it's great.
Sure. And do you think that helps set you up? Like, when you came to Code Platoon, you realize, like, oh, I have to go through this process just to get into the program. But that's
Yes.
like, you're used to that. You've
Yeah,
done.
we're definitely used to kind of the whole audition process, especially like the live technical interview. The only
Right.
thing that's kind of a little more, nerve-wracking is that you don't know what they're going to ask. In an audition, you get music most of the time, and you can prepare all this music. There's a little bit of sight reading, so I guess you can kind of compare sight reading to, a technical interview where they're just going to kind of throw a problem at you and see what you can do. But that's why you drill and you practice, and you're doing leak code, you're doing code wars, you're doing, whatever you kind of do to always keep those scales and, that kind of stuff fresh in your head. So then that way, when they do throw something at you, you can kind of piece it all together and make it work. So.
Sure. Susan, did you have experience with that as well, or?
Yes, I've taken auditions for different things in my career. And yeah, it's not a direct correlation, but the type of preparation that you would do for an audition is sort of similar to what you would do for a coding interview. It definitely translates a little bit.
Sure. And Jake, it seems like you're in full agreement here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the parallel on kind of how you progress in music and coding is very similar, just by the nature of the, I guess, kind of study and repetition element to it is very similar in music, where you spend a long time practicing, from being a beginner to kind of being a master of something. You still spend the same amount of time on the fundamentals, and I feel like that's just as important in coding. So I feel like it kind of transfers quite a bit.
Sure. On that note, so years and years ago, a music teacher taught me the concept of the structure and the creativity of music. So every piece of music has a structure, whether that's a time signature or, chordal change, modal change, whatever. It has a structure, but then interplaying with that is the creative element, which has a lot of leeway. Do you see similar themes in software development? Is there something that resonates with you in that aspect of yeah, there's the structure, but then there's these creative elements that I can play with and do differently? Everybody's nodding, but nobody wants to tell me.
Yeah, actually, I'll go. Having just graduated, almost a little over a month ago now. When we're giving our personal project with Code Platoon, they're definitely giving us a structure. We want this. We want your front end to be this, your back end to be this. We want you to do these kind of different things, and so we definitely had a structure. But then you really could create anything you wanted, and so, like you said, that creativity was there, but that structure was kind of set for us. And with those parameters, build this. And so that was really cool. Actually, I as a musician, I appreciate that. I like having some kind of structure, and then how I can interpret that is really rewarding.
Susan, what do you, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I think you sort of have to have this openness to ambiguity, because there's more than one way to solve a problem, just like there's more than one way to play a piece. And the cool thing about coding is that you have a lot of different tools at your disposable and your disposal, and libraries, and just different built-in functions that you can use that might yield the same result, but you can do it in a bunch of different ways. It's fascinating.
Sure. Jake, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I think it's there. I totally agree with that. And I don't know about the two of you, but I was definitely very intimidated, especially, I mean, I still am, on the job, but even during Code Platoon, I was very intimidated by the fact that the code either works or it doesn't work, but there's so many ways you can get there. And being confident in your ability to make a choice and commit to it, and being confident that it will work. It's very, I found that a lot in music too, with you kind of just have to be confident in your decision making, and you can usually get from point A to point B with your decision, and it kind of works the same way in code as long as you commit to it.
Sure. And on that note, it occurs to me when I first joined Code Platoon, not having a tech background at all, I realized there are some pervasive myths about software engineering in general. And a lot of people think that you have to be almost like a robotic type mathematical genius to be a coder. Comparing this to music, there's obviously room for different types of people in the world of music. You can be a classical musician who basically regurgitates things exactly how they were meant to be, or you can be in the world of like a Miles Davis who goes, this massive departure from structure at any given time and everything in between. Do you see similar concept in the field of software engineering where there's a place for multiple types of people who look at this? There's the super structure, and then there's the super creative, but they can work together. Do you guys see a place for that in your field right now? You're all too.
Go around again.
You're all too
Okay,
nice.
I'll go ahead. Yeah, I think it kind of goes to what your job is, but like if you have something to do with the look of a website or an app, that's gonna you have to think a lot more creatively than someone who's doing database work all day. And so it really, but it does take different kinds of people to do those sorts of things. And it's not just software engineering, but they're all sorts of jobs in the tech industry that require both analytical thinkers and creative thinkers.
Sure. Chad,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
agree.
Oh,
I was
Jake.
kind of sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead.
I definitely had found that since getting into this field and starting to kind of work in software engineering, it's really opened up my idea of what creativity is, especially coming from more artistic background. I had probably a more narrow idea of what it meant to be creative, and now creativity has definitely changed what it means to me. And, especially working with people that are much farther on their software engineering journey than I am, I see how intelligent and creatively they kind of think of a solution or find a way around a problem. And that, I feel like that, to me, at least, I'm working in the back end on an API team, so I'm not doing creative front end stuff as much. So creativity and for work right now for me is the creativity in solving a problem. So it's been a very cool new way to think about creativity.
That's really cool. Chad, you got any follow-up thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a little bit different. I'm, like I said, I just graduated, so I'm actually still looking for a job. So, but looking at all these, different, looking at the I guess the larger world of software development, there's so much one can do, and it's kind of trying to find out really what do I want to do, how, I guess, where do I want to put where I think my talents are, because it's one thing I think musicians like to also do is compare one to others, you know, like how do I stack up with this person? You know, it's kind of ingrained in us when we were younger and we would audition for first chair, you know, and so is one thing I know going through the cohort, try not to let that get in the way, and don't compare myself to others, because you know they're in a completely different part in their journey than I am, and but we're all trying to go to the same place. So it was but with that said, I think, you know, just yeah, I definitely found that creativity lied in different areas, you know, and like what Jake said, you know, it wasn't so much like what I was actually building. Maybe that's could be very creative, but how I was doing it, because, you know, like Susan said, there's 1,000 ways you could, you know, code something up, and sometimes it's beautiful and simple and elegant, and other times it might be a little messy, but it works, you know. So you know, that creativity is always there, and how you approach everything. So.
Sure. When I think we can look at that, like when comparing music, obviously everybody's working with the same 12 notes on a scale, right? But we can see that there's millions of different songs out there. So it's very clear that you can do a lot with just 12 notes on a scale. So it stands to reason that something as complex as Python or JavaScript can go in a lot of different directions, right? So that makes perfect sense. And I think that's, you know, it's a fair way of looking at it. What would you all offer then to, if you could speak to younger musicians out there today who are possibly in the military bands, or spouses, and you could say, hey, there's a connection here that you may not have thought of. What would be each of your elevator speech for that, if you will, the 30-second speech where you say, hey, there's a connection here, you may not have thought of it, but what is that? I've stumped everyone. And this is the part where we shift gears to music trivia just to get your brains working. No. I think I'm older than everyone here, so I can beat all of you in music trivia. I used to work, for the record, keeping it on the casual theme. If you've all seen the movie High Fidelity, I highly recommend it. It was with John Cusack. I lived that life. Before I ever joined the Army, I was that, like, when that movie came out, I was like, they made a movie about me. Oh my gosh. I worked in an indie record store in Denver. If you've ever watched the show South Park, they always talk about the restaurant Casa Bonita. It was right next door to Casa Bonita. Like literally, it was the next shop over. And so I watched people go in and out of Casa Bonita all day. And yeah,
Is the record shop still here?
It's out of business now, because
Gotcha.
most record shops, like nobody, you know, the whole internet. This would have been 97 through 2000-ish is when I worked there.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, I was the record store hippie, you know, so anything that occurred in music between 1950 and 2000, I got it covered. After 2001, when I joined the Army, I don't know, kind of lost it, but at any rate. So elevator speech, anyone got to volunteer.
I think if someone was telling me they were in a similar position as, you know, all of us had been transitioning from music, particularly a military music situation, going into software development, you know, if you've gotten to the point with music to become a professional and you're proficient enough on your instrument that can be your full-time job, you've already demonstrated to yourself that learning something new is totally doable, especially, you know, something like learning an instrument. And you should, you know, I always use an instrument kind of as a parallel or as a way to track my progress when I'm learning something new. You know, I use it as a way to remind myself of how long I sucked at something before I started to get good at something. And, you know, if you've become a professional musician, then you're obviously disciplined enough to get yourself, you know, from kind of the beginning to the end. So it's very achievable. And I think that music lays a good foundation for that.
Right on. Good summary. Susan, Chad, either one of you?
I think that was it. That was awesome.
That's a pretty solid summary, I gotta
Pretty
admit.
solid. Yeah, I nailed it, you know.
Susan, you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking a little bit about this when you asked about holding this meeting, and it was To me, it's all of the soft skills you learn as a musician that translate really well into software engineering, like your ability to receive feedback like you would in a private lesson, or tenacity, that your awareness of how you learn and your ability to stick with something until you get better at it. It's all of those things. You're not afraid to be bad at something new because you know it's not going to be that way forever.
Well, I think that's a great point brought up early on, this idea of just continuing at something that you can't be perfect at right away. You just can't. Even the best people in the world, best musicians in the world, did not start out at level 10. They just didn't. And you can hear many interviews with them saying exactly that. Doesn't matter what discipline it was, whether it was classical or jazz or rock, there's a common theme between all of them. They spent hundreds of hours by themselves in their room practicing. And that's it. That's what got them there. Any final, I'll have one final question to ask you all at the very end. Any final thoughts that any of you want to share that maybe we didn't cover? Maybe something I didn't think of first.
I have one for if this is going to reach people that are currently, musicians, whether it's in the military or civilian world and are thinking about getting into this profession. I think this is a fantastic, it can be depending on your job, but this is a very fantastic job if you want to have a full-time job and be able to do music on the side. I think can be a very great career path for work-life balance. And it can be really easy to continue doing music outside of work. So this is a really great option for someone looking to continue having music in their life, but maybe not make it their full-time job.
Great thought. I agree. It looks like we're almost out of time on my Zoom. So one really, really quick question for each one of you. You're doing some code, you're hammering out, you're banging on the keyboard. What's your go-to song? Chad, you're first.
Oh, for me, white noise. Sorry, I can't code with music.
White noise.
I'm
Okay.
gonna sit there and listen and enjoy the music too much. So
Susan?
Yeah, I'm actually a podcast person.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
You just murdered Jake a little bit. He's like dying and you see him.
I wish I could focus on both of those. That's impressive.
Yeah, it is actually. Because the podcasts I listen to are like get super in depth. I don't think that I could be doing anything that challenging while listening to a podcast. Jake, you have any like favorite go-to music?
I need dead silence.
Is
If
that
it's something,
right?
if it's like mindless code cleanup or like simple refactoring, I can do some instrumental stuff usually, but silence.
And that makes an awful lot of sense to me actually, because I think musicians or people who have spent a lot of time playing music have like their ears are tuned to be so attentive to things that you can't just have it as a background thing. Like I cannot listen to my favorite music and do something intent because my ears are focused heavily on, oh, there's a, time signature change I didn't think of or something like that. Maybe if it's a little bit more mindless, like kind of, I don't know, ambient type music, that's one thing. But if it's super in depth, like you're not listening to Frank Zappa while you're listening to or maybe you are. I mean, in which case, awesome, good for you.
You have a go-to, Greg?
I don't code, so I mean, I can't. My answer to this question is irrelevant. But I guess I've been a professional writer for years, and what I'm writing, it would depend greatly on what I'm writing. So I've done a lot of academic work where I would be the same as all of you. I couldn't listen to anything serious. But if I'm writing, I used to write for a military blog that had a lot of humor-based stuff. So I would listen to more upbeat, listen to something like Soundgarden or Rage Against the Machine, just to get that vibe. Or, like I said, Frank Zappa is great. I'm a huge Van Halen fan, Rush fan, all of that. But then to disassociate, I'd have to listen to classical or something because, yeah, I don't think I could tune into something very well either. So any thoughts that either any of you want to share, anything that I did not cover that you think I should, that we should be aware of in this? Because like I said, I've been curious about this. So I love the fact that you all joined us. This is really cool. This is something I could talk about for hours. I literally could, but you know, we want to keep it short, keep respectful of your time. So anything that you all want to add, please do.
Yeah, I guess one other thing for me is so I came into this really not having any software coding background whatsoever. I mean, in high school, I took typing because we didn't have, web development in high school,
Yep.
So, it's somebody's kind of, thinking about it, it's absolutely possible. I'm 48 years old and it's absolutely possible. You can do it. I think it's a lot of fun right now. Like, and I think, I think you'll find along the way, if you're a musician and you're exploring this, you will absolutely find this, lots of parallels between coding and music. And so it's absolutely worth it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, again, unless any of you have anything else to add, for those of you who stumble across this on YouTube, Greg at codeplatoon.org, Greg at codeplatoon.org. I'm the student recruitment and community outreach manager, so I am happy to engage with you one-on-one, ask some questions. If you want to talk to these fine folks in more depth about musicians and coding, I will, I'll talk to them privately and see if they want to share their information with you. But thank you all for joining me on this kind of an experimental endeavor, but I hope to do it with more branches of the service, like more specialized fields coming out of the military to kind of explore some of these connections. But I wanted to start with music because it's been a long time passion of mine. The first concert I ever saw, I was in high school in 1990, and I went and saw the band Rush when I was in high school. And I came home and I said, I want to be a drummer. I want to be a drummer. I want to be a drummer. My mom said, there's no way in hell you're bringing drums into this house. And so I became a guitar player instead. But it's been a lifelong love of mine for a long time. So I wanted to start here. And so I am deeply appreciative to all of you for joining me. So thank you once again to Jake, Chad, and Susan, all of you. And hey, thanks for embarking on this experiment with me. Anything else?
I think so. Thanks for having us, Greg.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you.
Nice
Thank
chatting
you.
with
And
you.
well, hopefully we'll do this again sometime, and maybe we'll have even more thoughts and get even more in depth. But thanks again. And like I said, we're running out of time anyway, so we got to cut it short. And thank you for your time, and we'll all talk soon.
Sounds good. See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.